Have you ever stopped to think why some people seem to learn faster than everyone else, effortlessly picking up new skills and understanding complex ideas in a fraction of the time it takes others? Why they are able to master things in weeks while others spend months or even years trying and still feel stuck, frustrated, and unsure of their progress? It's not talent, it's not intelligence, and it's definitely not luck, even though that's what most people believe when they compare themselves to others. So what is it that actually makes the difference between those who learn quickly and those who struggle constantly? There's a simple method, something so obvious and so overlooked that once you truly understand it, you will never see learning the same way again. And today, that's exactly what you're going to discover, because this one shift in the way you approach learning can completely change how you absorb information and develop skills. This change doesn't just apply to studying, but to learning languages, building skills, making money, and even shaping your entire future. But before going deeper, let me ask you something important, something that might sound familiar to you. Have you ever spent hours studying, reading, watching videos, or trying to understand something, only to realize the next day that you forgot almost everything? Be honest with yourself for a second, because this happens to almost everyone. You read, you highlight important parts, you go back and read again, and in that moment, it feels productive, like you're actually making progress. But then, when you try to recall what you learned, it's almost as if your mind goes blank, and nothing really sticks the way you expected. So why does this happen, and why do so many people go through the same frustrating cycle over and over again? Because what you've been taught about learning is fundamentally broken, and most people never question it. Most people believe that learning is about consuming as much information as possible, reading more, watching more, taking more notes, and repeating the same material again and again. But that's not learning, that's just exposure, and exposure alone does not create mastery. Real learning is something completely different, and this is where everything starts to shift. If you look closely at top performers, whether they are athletes, entrepreneurs, creators, or high-level students, you will notice a pattern that almost no one talks about. They don't just consume information passively, they interact with it, they challenge it, they struggle with it, and most importantly, they actively try to retrieve and apply it. And that is the method that changes everything. It's called active learning, but despite the name, it's not complicated or difficult to understand. It's actually incredibly simple once you see it clearly. And yet almost no one uses it consistently because it goes against what feels easy and comfortable. Let's make this even clearer with a simple example that illustrates the difference. Imagine two people trying to learn exactly the same thing, using different approaches. The first person spends 2 full hours reading a book, going through pages carefully, highlighting key ideas, and reviewing everything multiple times. The second person reads for just 20 minutes, then closes the book and tries to explain everything they just learned from memory without looking back. Who do you think will actually learn faster and retain more information over time? The answer is obvious once you understand how the brain works, because the second person is forcing their brain to engage deeply with the material. The moment you try to recall something without looking, your brain wakes up. It starts searching, connecting ideas, and rebuilding information. And in that exact process, your brain is literally rewiring itself, strengthening neural pathways that make future recall easier and faster. That is where real learning happens, not when information is passively entering your mind, but when you actively try to pull it out. And here's something even more surprising that most people don't realize. Scientific studies have shown that retrieval practice, which simply means testing yourself and trying to remember what you learned, can double or even triple your retention. And the most interesting part is that this happens without studying more hours or putting in extra effort, but simply by changing how you engage with the material. So if it's so effective, why doesn't everyone use this method all the time? Because it feels uncomfortable, and most people naturally avoid discomfort. Reading feels easy, highlighting feels easy, watching videos feels easy, and all of these give you the illusion of progress. But testing yourself, forgetting things, struggling to remember details, and facing gaps in your knowledge feels like failure. And because it feels like failure, people avoid it, even though it's actually the fastest path to improvement. And that's exactly why so many people stay stuck, repeating the same ineffective methods without realizing what's holding them back. Let me tell you a quick story that makes this even clearer. There was a student preparing for a major exam, and like most people, he followed the traditional approach. He read textbooks for hours, took detailed notes, reviewed everything multiple times, and tried to absorb as much information as possible. But despite all that effort, his results were average, and he couldn't understand why he wasn't improving. Then something changed, and this change completely transformed his results. He stopped rereading everything over and over again, and instead, he started closing the book after each chapter and writing down everything he could remember. At first, it was frustrating and uncomfortable because he realized he barely remembered anything, and it felt like he was doing worse than before. But instead of giving up, he kept going, repeating this process day after day, even when it felt difficult. And gradually, something started to change. His ability to recall information improved, his understanding became deeper, and the connections between ideas became clearer. And when the exam finally came, the result surprised everyone. He didn't just pass, he achieved one of the highest scores in his class, outperforming people who had studied the same material for the same amount of time. The difference was not effort, it was not time, it was the method he used. Now let's break this down even further, because this principle goes far beyond studying for exams. This applies to every skill you want to learn in life. If you want to learn a new language faster, you need to stop just listening and start speaking, even if you make mistakes. In fact, especially if you make mistakes, because mistakes create feedback, and feedback accelerates learning. If you want to get better at any skill, you need to stop watching endless tutorials and start doing the thing yourself. Because action creates experience, and experience creates understanding. Let me ask you another question that might make you think. How many videos have you watched? How many ideas have you heard? And how many times have you thought, this is useful, but then never actually applied it? This happens all the time, and it's one of the biggest reasons people don't progress. Because information without action feels good in the moment, but it doesn't create real change. That's why this method is so powerful, because it forces you to engage, to think, to struggle, and to actually learn. And there's another layer to this that makes it even more effective. Spacing, instead of cramming everything at once. Instead of studying something for 3 hours in one sitting, it's far more effective to study for shorter periods multiple times, with breaks in between. Because forgetting is not the enemy. Forgetting is actually part of the learning process. When you revisit something after some time has passed, your brain has to rebuild the connection, and that rebuilding makes the memory stronger. So now you have two powerful tools that can completely transform how you learn. Retrieval, which forces your brain to actively recall information. And spacing, which strengthens memory over time through repetition with gaps. But there's one more piece that takes this to another level: teaching what you learn. Even if you're not a teacher, even if there's no one around, you can still use this method. Explain what you learned as if you were teaching someone else, using simple words and clear ideas. Because if you can't explain something in a simple way, it means you don't truly understand it yet. And when you try to explain it, your brain starts organizing the information, identifying gaps, and fixing confusion. And suddenly, things that seemed complicated start to make sense. This approach is often called the Feynman technique, but the name doesn't matter as much as the principle behind it. Learn something, recall it without looking, explain it in simple terms, and repeat the process. It's simple, but incredibly powerful when applied consistently. Now imagine applying this method to your daily life. Instead of passively scrolling through content, you actively engage with what you learn. Instead of consuming information endlessly, you start creating and applying. Instead of forgetting most of what you see, you begin to retain what truly matters. Where would you be in 6 months if you did this consistently? Where would you be in 1 year if you fully committed to this approach? Because the truth is, most people are not stuck because they are incapable of learning. They are stuck because they were never taught how to learn effectively. And once you fix that, everything starts to change. You make faster progress, you build more confidence, and you start seeing real results. And here's something that most people completely underestimate. Learning how to learn is one of the most valuable skills you can develop, because once you master this skill, you can learn anything faster than you ever thought possible. And in a world that changes as quickly as ours, that ability is more valuable than ever. So here's what you need to do starting today. Don't just watch content, don't just read information, and don't just passively consume ideas. Engage with what you're learning in an active way. After every piece of information, pause for a moment, close the material, and ask yourself what you just learned. Write it down, say it out loud, or try to explain it without looking. Test yourself, even if it feels difficult, because that difficulty is what drives growth. Over time, that effort turns into mastery, and what once felt hard becomes natural. Now think about this for a moment. What if the only thing standing between you and the person you want to become is not your intelligence, not your background, and not your resources, but simply the way you learn? That idea is powerful because it means you are not stuck. You are just using the wrong system. And now that you know the right one, everything becomes possible. So the next time you sit down to learn something new, remember this. Don't just consume information, actively retrieve it. Don't just repeat things mindlessly, space your learning over time. Don't just understand something once, teach it and reinforce it. It's simple, but it can change everything. And if you actually apply this method, not tomorrow, not next week, but starting today, you will begin to notice a difference. You will remember more, understand faster, and feel more in control of your progress. Because you are no longer guessing, you are using a system that works. So let me ask you one last question. Are you going to keep learning the old way and stay where you are, or are you finally ready to change everything? Because the difference between knowing this method and actually using it is the difference between staying the same and transforming your life. And the choice is entirely yours.